I'd like to welcome you to our next talk. Peter Neubauer will be speaking on moving forward with logo. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Andy. Logo was invented back in the early 60s. A group of smart people deeply involved.
Sit on.
Is that any better? No?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
I got you, boss.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Logo is a programming language invented in the early 60s by a group of mathematicians, educators, and computer scientists at MIT. And keep in mind, at that time, Logo was one of the first attempts to bring computers to education and youth. But Logo is much more than just a computer language. It's a philosophy of education. I'm sure many of us have seen computers used as machines for administering tests. And Logo said, no, that's not the right way to use a computer in education. A computer is an infinitely malleable micro world that allows a student to explore different ideas. I talked about this more back in 2015, and thanks to the generosity of Mr. Scott, you too can watch that. If you're interested, there's a book called Mindstorms released in, I want to say, 82 or 83 that is now available as a free downloadable PDF. I recommend reading that. It's a great way to learn more about the ideas behind Logo. Since my presentation in 2015, Terrapin, which is one of the companies we're familiar with as a logo vendor for the Apple II, they're still around, released a web-based version of Logo. It's pretty good, but in 2 years, this is pretty much the bulk of what happened in the world of Logo. Logo is largely considered obsolete, dead. It was a great language back in the 80s, but then interest moved on to other things. Interest moved on to hypermedia, tools like HyperCard, and nowadays their interest has focused on tools like Scratch, which is a visual block-based language. It excels at having a very low barrier to entry for new programmers. Back in 2015, I shared this hypothesis. I believe that Logo, the language, in addition to the philosophy, remain relevant and useful today. I think there's untapped potential and opportunities for innovation. Scratch is an excellent language. It has a very low barrier to entry, but it also lowers the ceiling. It lowers what you can do, the complexity of the programs that you can create. With Scratch, you simply run into how large of a program can you fit on the screen. The density of information is much lower with a visual language compared to a traditional text-based language. When you start wanting to do more sophisticated types of programming, data structures, artificial intelligence, it becomes difficult with Scratch. So I believe that Logo is still relevant because it has a low barrier to entry, but it has a much higher ceiling than some of the modern alternatives. Also, there's a huge body of existing work about Logo. In a bibliography published by MIT in 1985, there were, I believe, more than 500 entries. That's academic research, books, lesson plans. I think today Logo remains one of the most researched, most written about programming languages in the educational environment. But I think that information, those books are untapped because all the information that has been developed, I believe, is still relevant and still could be used to help teach new programmers. So since 2015, I thought a bit more about how I could test this hypothesis. First of all, I want something that is Logo. I don't want to invent a new language that's interesting and maybe useful, but that's not my objective here. I also wanted something that was compatible with Apple Logo too, because I learned how to program using Apple Logo. That's familiar to me. There are many different versions of Logo on the order of hundreds, but I think Apple Logo 2 represents a good baseline. I also wanted something that ran on my iPad, which even though almost every personal computer out there has at least one version of Logo, there's no good solution available on the iPad right now. Over the years, there's been a few Logo-like iPad apps that have popped up, but they they often leave out some of the more powerful features of Logo and just focus on graphics and turtle graphics. And I don't believe that any of those apps are currently available in the App Store. The developers have moved on. Their certificates have expired and they've fallen out of the App Store. So surprisingly, I don't think there's a good solution for Logo on the iPad. I also wanted a modern user interface, something that matches the expectations that you have when you're using an iPad. And while you could use Terrapin Web Logo on an iPad, it works well. It doesn't have the type of user interface that you expect from an iPad native application. And finally, I wanted a platform that I could change, that I could expand, that I could test different ways of adapting the user interface of Logo to modern expectations. So it's demo time. Of course, we have an animation, I think. Where'd my animation go? Oh well, you can imagine what the animation looks like. So this is my realization of Logo on the iPad. It's still a work in progress, but I think it has some key features that demonstrate that we can do this and that Logo is usable on the iPad. First of all, a lot of the changes we need to make for Logo on an iPad are just basic changes with how user interfaces work. Back on the Apple II, you might use catalog and prefix and load to load your files, but nowadays we expect to have something like this, a collection view, and just tap on a program to open it. And yes, my icons are red boxes. So let's tap on KansasFest. And the next problem we come up with is, how do we explain to a new programmer or someone who's never used an Apple II that programming with Logo is interactive? We've all seen this with AppleSoft Basic. You type a command, you get a result. Sometimes you call it immediate mode. Maybe if you want a more modern buzzword, you might call it a read, evaluate, print loop, or REPL. But whatever you call it, this whole thought process of type something in, get something back is I think new to a lot of modern computer users. I found parallels with how chat applications work, with how iMessages work. With iMessage, you type a message and you get a response. With Logo, it's the same way, except you get a response from the computer, the Logo interpreter, if you will. So I designed a user interface that resembles iMessage, just to cue people into how that works. You have a giant text entry box at the bottom, and we have chronological history with chat bubbles, and yes, my chat bubbles look a little off, but you get the idea. With chat bubbles, they cue the user into how this works. So let's go ahead and type a command to Logo. I'm just going to print out the results of adding 1 plus 2 as an example. Use the show command. The next problem we run into is trying to use a keyboard, a text-centric entry on a touch device. But that's been solved with predictive text entry, so Logo does that too. I've typed the letter S, and Logo is telling you all the commands and variables that it knows about that begin with S. In this case, I'm going to type an H, and OK, there's the command I want. Show. So I'm going to tap on that. Another advantage of this type of entry is that it lowers the barrier to entry and helps someone understand and learn Logo commands. If you've ever used a modern programming user interface, maybe Visual Studio or Xcode, you know that the interface provides you with auto-completion. This helps both beginners and advanced programmers as well remember the command they're going to type, because most programming languages have so many commands that it's often difficult to remember them. So we also get that benefit here. Next thing that we see on modern programming interface is syntax highlighting. As you're typing, the interface color codes items so that you can get some cues about the structure of what you're typing and whether or not what you're typing is actually going to work. So in this case, show is shown up in a orangish color, a little difficult to see on the projector. It means that, yes, I recognize what you typed. It's a valid command. But then there's this red box at the end, but it's not going to work because you haven't typed what you want to show. So let's go ahead and do that. Notice that the red box went away because show one is actually a command that will work. I wanted to add 1 plus 2. Another red box. I still haven't told it what to add. So let's add a 2. Okay. No red, no orange. We should be good. Let's hit go. And sure enough, echoes the results, and then logo replies. And of course we have turtle graphics. It's certainly not the only or even the best part of logo, but it's certainly well known. So earlier I created a small procedure. Let's go ahead and run that. And again, notice it's predicting, and also it showed up in orange because I haven't finished typing anything. It won't work that way, but as soon as I finish typing the command, we're done. And we have our turtle up here, pops up as needed, and he's off to the races. And note, this is a recursively defined procedure, and this happens to be one of the classic examples that shows up in some of the literature about logo. So what's next? Yes, this is logo right here. This is a procedure that I defined, and here I run that procedure, and it draws stuff. In this case, it draws. I'm not quite sure what to call that, but if you've read books on logo, you've probably seen patterns similar to this. All right, let's jump back to the presentation. So what's next? Certainly there's some user interface glitches you've seen. My giant red icons need improvement. There's opportunity for context-sensitive help in there. Not only might you see a command pop up as a recommendation, but I'd like to be able to link over to detailed help on that. Right now you can use the same commands with Apple Logo to define your procedures, view your variables, and so on. I'd like an iPad-centric interface for doing that, what I call the workspace browser. The predictive entry works, but I think some heuristics could make it a bit better, give you more relevant suggestions. I have most of Apple Logo 2 implemented. The file I/O is missing some parts. There's no sound, and the only color the turtle draws is black. And I want robots. I do have an interface to the Wonder Workshop Bow robot via Bluetooth. I don't have the robot here with me to demonstrate that, but I think that, well, anything involving robots is much cooler. It's something, particularly when you have an iPad, you can sit down next to it, you can follow the robot around. I think the iPad is the ideal interface for learning how to program with robots. I'd like to add a tutorial here, and of course, it all comes down to profit. I do want to get this in the App Store within, I would say, less than the next 6 months. I'm looking at a freemium model, but I'm not sure quite where the pricing tiers are or what's appropriate.
More than one model on the App Store?
More than one model of what?
Can you put more than one version of your program on that?
I could, yes. That's an option too. There are many types of language extensions available, other versions of Logo with neat features such as 3D graphics, sensors, paddles, object-oriented features, so I'm looking at adding some of those. Logo does have a debugger. Right now the interface is the same as the debugger that you get in Apple Logo 2, which doesn't adapt very well to an iPad. The underlying technology is there, but I want to add a better user interface, what I call visual debugging. I think this is particularly important for learning how to program. iCloud synchronization would be nice, more tutorials would be nice. And hopefully by the fall I will be looking for beta testers. If you'd like to talk to me about this, please find me this week. Questions?
Or solutions for the iPad, right?
It is for the iPad right now, yes.
Is there one runs on the Mac already? Is that way you address that, or is it just too much of it runs all at once?
There are numerous versions of Logo for every platform out there, including the Mac desktop, Windows desktop, Linux, etc. Yeah, maybe at some point I'll port this to the desktop, but I don't think that's as interesting as the iPad right now. Questions? Yes, Charles.
So the syntax is the same as Apple II logo version whatever syntax.
My goal is for compatibility with Apple Logo 2, which is the ProDOS version of Logo.
So from there, you can take an example that's on the web or that's in a book and type it in or copy and paste if you have that capability from a web page or whatever, straight into your interface and then have it run and do the turtle graphics or whatever.
Yes, we have 30 or 40 years of literature example books on Logo. I want to be able to leverage that, reuse that. So you could pull out a book from 1985, you could pull out your Apple Logo 2 manual, and it would still be relevant. Yes.
I wasn't there the first time. Apple logo was pretty much the preeminent educational logo in schools in America. Is that correct?
If the school had apples, which was true in most cases, yes, either Apple Logo 2 or Apple Logo, which was the DOS-based version of Logo.
And there weren't any widespread competitors to it in the same ballpark.
On the Apple, no. LCSI's mission was to create logo for every platform, every computer out there. And they created Apple Logo and Apple Logo 2. There was also Terrapin Logo on the Apple II, which is an excellent version as well. Pretty close, almost compatible, but I chose Apple Logo 2 mostly because at that time I had the Apple Logo 2 manual on my desk. Yes?
Tory logo as an event primitive, which might be useful to look at the syntax of for extension things
What was the primitive again?
Tory logo
Sorry, I just missed the name of the primitive.
was LCS, the land trade.
Okay.
So it was like land there.
Yeah, Apple Logo 2 does not have that, but I will take a look at that.
I can check out the manual.
Okay, got it. Thank you, I appreciate that. That would be particularly relevant once I add support for robots. Other questions? I'm almost out of time. Yes.
Are there limits to the App Store and places like my vague recollection is that you can't have programming like apps and apps. I don't know where the boundaries are. This seems like it's getting closer to the boundary.
There are restrictions on what the App Store accepts. There are numerous examples of apps in the App Store right now that are programming language. I think the restriction more comes into effect when you're trying to write an iPad native app. But I'm not trying to recreate iPad native apps. Examples are Apple's own Swift Playgrounds, Codia is a fairly popular app out there that I forget what programming language I used, but Scratch is also in the App Store. So there are similar examples. Yes?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that there's been a sort of minor announcement, not really recent, that I was going to ask you about that affected your ability to retrieve. Because they said they seem to be relaxing a little bit on the ability of compilers to put on these guidance on that server. Some very interesting answer. It seems like that would be relaxing. Nothing official.
Right, I did read about that. In this case, I felt okay because I think there are other examples of programming languages in the App Store, but I will read more about that. Thanks. One more question? No more questions? Yes.
You have programs called other programs.
You can define multiple procedures, and Logo has what's called a workspace, which is a collection of all the variables and procedures that you've created. Procedures can call each other, and Logo is actually fairly sophisticated. Recursion's pretty easy, but in the example I had up earlier, the procedure was calling itself, so you could just as easily create another procedure that it calls instead. Okay, thank you.